welcome.
Super. Thank you very
So,
much.
I would like to tell the audience something about your work. Focus on political economy of environmental knowledge, environmental governance, and the role of time and tradition in ecological economic production. More about your biography, the audience can find on the conference web. And Today you will present us very interesting topics, mangroves and circular economy, where water meets water and what that implies. Good luck, and you can start your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. You will give me control to advance the slides, or how do I do this?
Yes, just a minute. Okay, now you have the
Okay.
control.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for the invitation to present. And hello to all of the audience. Thank you for attending this presentation. I would like to start out just by reflecting a little bit on the complexity of water. What is water? Water is many things to many people. It is a chemical. It is a very special chemical, the only chemical that has the capacity to exist in the three states that we know of solid, liquid, and gas, all within the normal atmospheric temperature of the planet Earth. It's potentially a big problem. It generates storms that cause great problems for human beings. But at the same time, it's a source of life for human beings. We need water to live. In addition, water is a habitat, not only for fish and for other aquatic mammals, but also for the human being, who we can talk about being a sort of amphibian, because the human being, unlike many other types of animals on the planet Earth, is incapable of living without water for a very long time. And finally, water has become, in the late modern society, a resource where we use it for transporting heavy goods, and we use it as a resource for supplies of energy, such as with this dam, which is quite a controversial dam here in Colombia, called Hidro Ituanga. I also want to touch a little bit on the question, what is this circular economy? In terms of what is this circular economy, touching the question, we have a lot of different perspectives that have developed over the years. We have a discussion of topics, most recently of biomimicry, and also themes of design and the way in which circular or recycled clothing and clothing that's conscious of the origins of its production can be a part of the circular economy and a part of the sustainable development goals. And we could say that the sustainable development goals also are a part of that circular economy. We also have a whole another component of the circular economy, which is the complex systems modeling and mapping, conducted in a range of different domains, from ecological economics and clean production, industrial ecology, to sustainability sciences. And so I want to introduce that because I'd like to present to you a different approach to the circular economy, which is a bit older, but very much consistent. And that is the work of the ecological economist Nicholas Georgescu-Roegen. Nicholas Georgescu-Roegen was very concerned about the biological character of economic processes. And from my point of view, this is precisely what we have with the circular economy, is this characteristic of the biological nature of the economic process. And he was quite critical of something called the Wicksteed production function, which he called in his elegant manner. Spoke many languages. He was a very highly educated individual, an acme of imprecision. And he said, when we are trying to understand the processes of economics, we need to be precise. His personal biography is quite interesting because he was a very successful scientist before World War II. He finished his PhD in Paris and moved to the United States, where he worked at Harvard. But during World War II, he decided to return to Romania to help run the economy during the war. After the war, having been an employee at Harvard University and being an economist of the mainstream of the era, Nicholas Georgescu found himself in physical danger in Romania and decided to return to the United States. However, he brought some very important lessons with him when he returned. And these lessons are documented in his own annals, and I just want to mention two of them. When he got back to Harvard, he said, the mathematics that I'm using to represent economic processes is not consistent with the way that the peasants in Romania were behaving on the countryside. And he said, well, basically, as far as I can see, if the mathematics and the peasants are inconsistent and the peasants are alive, then there's a problem with the mathematics. And he said, well, one could certainly not expect a society that cannot live according to the mathematics that we've designed to commit suicide rather than to adopt a different system. And he began to dedicate a lot of time and effort and his career to understanding what was wrong with the mathematics and how to better represent the mathematics of economics of real life. And it's that mathematics that I use in my research and that I'm going to try and illustrate to you a little bit in the presentation today. So he concluded in his later works that an anthropomorphic model, a model based on math, has no value unless it's associated with some kind of a dialectical reasoning, a process that's underway. And in order to discuss that, he uses a very particular term from the German language, which he had command of, which is Anschauung. It can be translated as intuition, subjective observation, or what I prefer, purposive gaze. It's a term that's used by Immanuel Kant in his early philosophical writings, and in his later philosophical writings, and he discusses this in terms of a distinction between what he calls Verstand, which is comprehension or understanding the characteristics of a thing in and of itself, and Anschauung, which is a subjective comprehension, where and what that thing is in relation to the interpretive subject. And here we have something that pertains to the intentionality. An object does not have value, it does not have economic utility outside of its purpose. And this brings us back to the question of water, because there is, in some respects, no such thing as water. Water instead is a many varied object that has a huge number of different purposes. And depending upon the purpose, one or another type of water serves for one or another end. And it's precisely unpacking that I hope to be able to do for you today with the work of Georgescu. So in terms of the concept of economic Anschauung, he talks about it in terms of space and time. And he delimits what he refers to as process boundaries. He's quite critical of the idea that we use only clock time to measure transformations in economic processes, and introduces in a somewhat implicit manner this third category, which we refer to as cuisine, myself and my colleague Kosa Mayumi, with whom I wrote this text that is referenced here. We discuss this in terms of what defines the horizons of time, the analytical perspective and space within which one is considering one or another object's value. And from there, we build the concept into the flow fund elements that Georgescu introduces in his own mathematical models. And that's something that I developed further with my student, Jose Silva Macher. So when we want to talk about flows and funds, what are they? Georgescu defines them as follows, according to Mayumi, which I think is a really nice description. Flows are elements that enter but do not leave a process, or conversely, elements that exit without having entered, i.e. that have been produced. And funds are elements that enter and exit a process unchanged, transforming inflows into outputs, making economic processes and transformation possible. So and I apologize because this slide is animated, and having uploaded it, it lost a little bit of its spirit, but I will try to explain to you what we have here. We have a chocolate chip cookie here, and the critique of Georgescu in terms of the Wickseed function is that it provides us with only a list of ingredients, which is a discussion he had in common with Kenneth Boulding. And eventually what Georgescu brought us to, and this is where we developed the concept of cuisine, is not only do we need a list of ingredients, but also their relationships to each other within a recipe, which is what is hidden here behind the image. But we finally need the mixing instructions, and that's what you see here below. And we could actually say the mixing instructions are the most important component of a process, the thing that distinguishes whether I'm going to have one product or another. So in my work with Koso Mayumi, we developed a distinction between different types of categories of flows and funds based on the time horizon perspectives or Anschauung of the actors. So in the daily life of a farmer, a seed serves as a store to be planted in the future. In regular activities of production, it's a fund. It produces the crop, including more seeds that can be used in the harvest of the next year. But if we change the time horizons, and that becomes very short because there's a collapse of the crop, then that seed may very well become a flow, something that needs to be consumed, something that's not there at the end of the process. So how can we imagine this in concrete terms? I know it's a very abstract concept. We can think about flows and funds in terms of their relationship to the category of capital. So for a farmer, a tree that produces fruit is a fund. But for a carpenter, it's a supply of wood. It's something they will use up in the course of the production process. One of the strengths of this model is it allows us to move back and forth between economic and ecological processes. So we can also talk about funds and flows in terms of the bee that uses the nectar from a tree and the aphid that consumes the tree in its entirety. So having introduced these concepts, I'd now like to bring you through a short example and discuss a little bit the way in which water meets water and how flow fund analysis can help us understand the challenges and resolve conflicts in this situation. So this is the Great Swamp of Santa Marta, which is located in the north of Colombia, which is located in the north of Latin America, in South America. The Great Swamp of Santa Marta is a biosphere reserve. It's also a Ramsar site. It's a mega biodiverse region in combination with the Sierra Nevada to its east. In the 1950s, plantations were established here in this region by the United Fruit Company and eventually by many other international agro-industry companies. That's a long history. I won't go into it. But it began to generate deterioration, above all, slowing down the flow of water into the Ciénaga, which is quite shallow and needs that water to come at speed, which it does from the Sierra Nevada, which is a very high mountain range that is located here to the right. Oh, sorry, in this case, to the east. And so the irrigation is slowing down the water and reducing the volume, both of which are big problems for the oxygenation of this water inside of the swamp. To add to that, in the 1960s and the early 70s, a road was constructed along this barrier island here, generating enormous problems. First of all, there was direct excavation of the mangrove, and then there was also the blocking of the salts and the freshwater circulation system. This led to a massive ecological collapse in the system in the 70s and the 80s, which eventually was engaged in the 1990s through attempts to replant mangroves, which were largely unsuccessful, and eventually channels to increase circulation. And finally, there are also now channels that are being cut from the River Magdalena, which is one of the largest rivers in Colombia and one of the largest rivers in the world. The water that flows from the Magdalena, the silt that's brought from the mountains in Colombia reaches as far as Jamaica. To increase the water flow, again, trying to reestablish the biological balance in the system. So now I'd like to present to you a few Anschauungen and the concept of the conflicts, and then hopefully we have still a few minutes for discussion. So the first Anschauung I'd like to present to you is the economic Anschauung of the Mestizo artisanal fishing community established in the Great Swamp of Santa Marta. And they are living from daily subsistence. This is a marginalized socioeconomic situation. They are neither colonized nor colonizer. They are the people with the least rights in Colombia. They have a loose, gendered, disaggregated society and a fishing identity, which symbolizes both their social independence and their condition inside of this colonial structure. And they're also situated in an unstable armed conflict and trafficking context. So next category I'd like to present to you is the economic anshang of the agricultural sector at the base of the Sierra Nevada to the east. This is focused entirely on maximizing short-term profits. It's directed largely by the colonial elite, some smallholders. Almost all of the product is exported. The bananas, some stay in the country, but almost all of the palm oil is exported, including to be mixed in other countries with the chocolate from Colombia. And you have then also the marginalized employees in this community. It's a major source of income for the region and for the country, and it's heavily dependent on irrigation. It would not work if the water that was coming from the mountain range was not stopped and used for irrigation before being sent into the mangrove. And then we also have the tourism sector, which is also focused on maximizing short-term profits. It's also directed by the colonial elite, also locals from the interior of the country who are typically also elites who have second homes or come for tourism. This is the group of them there. International clients to a certain degree. It's a major source of income also for the region and the country, and it's diverting substantial amounts of water from its natural river flows, as you can see here by this landscape structured area of pools and fresh water along the coast, which is all synthetic. And also almost every hotel will have its swimming pool. So what are we looking at here in terms of the conflict? Well, we have the problem on the Barranquilla side, which is the Magdalena River. So we have physical destruction of the mangroves, timbering, coast road construction, reduced water flow, heavy metal and biological contamination. And we also have the city of Barranquilla serving as a gateway for tourism pressure. On the other side, here's the Sierra Nevada of Santa Marta. And you can see here all of the rivers that are coming down. These rivers, due to the sharpness of the angle of the canter of this mountain range, come at a very high velocity into the agricultural area, and they're stopped. So we have reduced water flow, biological contamination due to upstream urbanization, the direct destruction of mangroves, and also, again, the gateway for tourism. So I'd like to show you just a few slides illustrating the analytical process that I'm going to apply to this case. In another case that I developed with my student, Jose Silvamacher, in terms of gold mining and milk production. So this is in a situation in the north of Peru, in a place called Cajamarca, which experienced extensive exploitation of gold. This is the first mine, which is called the Yanacocha mine, which allowed us to be able to do very detailed calculations predicting the impacts of the Conga mine, because we had all of the information about the Yanacocha mine, and the deposits are identical. So here you can see a group of mestizo campesinos in the mountains, in the high mountains of Peru, but in many respects quite similar to the community in Santa Marta in the Ciénaga. And what we can see here is the explosion of demand in this case, not for bananas and palm oil, but for gold associated with the economic collapse in 2007. So we conducted an analysis, and based on the idea of putting together these perspectives of different time horizons and orientations, we identified the point of conflict between these two groups. And it basically reduces down to the problem that for the milk producing community, what is fund, which is the landscape that is used to graze cattle, is a flow for the industrial mining activity. And so what we are talking about here is one way to identify conflicts in terms of this tension, where something that is a flow for one group is a fund for another group, because something cannot be simultaneously a flow and a fund. Either it's consumed or it's not. And again, I apologize because I had a really nice animation for this, but I will try to walk you through the picture. I'm sure it's a bit more difficult to understand all of the boxes and squiggles if I don't have the animation. So if we start over here, we have the Anshang of the Mestizo artisanal fishing community, which includes the Great Swamp and also the ocean. And here the Great Swamp, and both the Great Swamp and the ocean serve as funds, and also the river system that is providing the supply of water into the Great Swamp, which is quite important for the stability of the ecosystem. We can then move to look at the agricultural sector, and we can see that for them, the rivers feeding the Great Swamp are a flow. They are being consumed in the course of the agricultural production activity. So here we see our first conflict between the river source in these two groups. And we can also see here in the tourism sector that the river system again serves as a flow, because there's a huge diversion of resources by the tourism sector to take water for the hotels, for the pools, and to supply drinking water for the tourist community. And then the tourism sector is also using the ocean as a fund. So what we can see here is basically that there's an explanation provided in terms of use of water for the flow fund model of the structure and anatomy of the conflicts. And I thank you very much for your attention. And I guess we have a few minutes still for discussion.
Yes, yes. Thank you too. Thank you very much for your presentation. Now we open the question session. If there is any question, you have 5 minutes left now. Yes, Stefania Balika asked, I am just curious about the African palm oil in the area. Is the palm native to area, or it is invasive and putting a lot of pressure of CE?
No, the African palm is from Africa. It's not native, and it does put a great deal of pressure. I would say there's two factors. One factor is that it's non-native, so it's not compatible with the biology of the context. The banana is native, so the impacts are less. But there are also a lot of impacts from the banana, and this is because the banana, and as well as the palm, are produced on an industrial scale. So the impacts in terms of water flow and in terms of use of pesticides and contamination and residuals, because the only thing that's exported is the product. And so the residual parts of the plant that are not exported then become left as biomass there in the ciénaga, and are not necessarily, especially with the palm, something that's easily digested by other biological life forms in the system.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's see if you have another question. Not until now.
Mm-hmm.
So, thank you again for your acceptance of our invitation. So, we invite you to watch the other information session. We will keep in touch for our next collaboration. We will see. Oh, yes, Cosmini Vașcu tell us thanks for the excellent presentation. In Romania, Georgescu Röntgen remains fairly unknown. Yes, it is true. Maybe with your presentation, the name of Georgescu Röntgen will become more known. Thank you very much. Thank you again, and bye bye. See you for the next meetings or for the next event.
Thank you very much. I certainly do hope so. And I'm very happy to have presented on him to the group here in Romania. I call him the person who was too smart to get a Nobel Prize.
Thank you too. Bye bye.
Bye bye.